Good afternoon, everyone. How are you, wherever you are in the world? Welcome to another Find My Past from Home. Look at that. I see people saying hello already. That's tremendously exciting. Welcome, and I hope to see more of you. Look at that. So we've got Sean in New Zealand, Nicole as well. Ellie's in the comments, ready to shepherd you so ably. And we're going to be talking today about that backbone of family history, the census. I've got a few slides for you. We're going to go through a little bit of history and a few tips, but drop your questions into the comments as we go along, and we're going to spend probably about half an hour at the end talking specifically about your own census queries, issues, questions, qualms, and anything else you can think about. So definitely keep talking and keep asking as we go through. Hopefully, though, we may actually answer some of those questions as we go. So I'm going to leap in. It looks like you're all starting to bed in. I'm going to give it about a minute or so just to make sure. I see the numbers coming up. Lots of people talking about, so they had snow, Ellen, in Illinois, 4 inches of snow. We haven't got any snow here in Edinburgh. It's actually a bright sunny day for the first time in a while, and hopefully it will stay. And I see Ashley in Charleston, so I remember Charleston quite well. I've been there to visit. I love that city. It's wonderful. So I hope you're keeping it safe. I see Janine in Utah as well, which is another place that I like very much. And of course, Deborah's in Scotland, just as I am, and Ellie is. So that's great to see some locals too. Okay, so it looks like the numbers are creeping up. So I'm going to start our presentation. I'm going to go straight into this and let's discuss the census. So here we go. So this is today's presentation. We're going to talk about using census records for family history. We're going to start with a bit of history and explain a little bit about censuses themselves. So a census is a recorded count of any population in a particular location on a specific date. It sometimes helps to know right from the start what we're looking at. But census records take all kinds of different forms. They were used for different reasons. They were used sometimes for taxation, quite often for taxation, statistical analysis, military service, political representation, many different reasons, but they exist in one form or other almost globally. Around the world, you will find some kind of census, whether you're looking in Italy, the United States, Canada, parts of Africa, Australia. They all have things resembling a census. They might do different things with them, but a census is taken place. Censuses are covered by privacy laws in most countries because they have so much information and so much detail. And that, of course, is the reason why we as family historians enjoy it so much. So that's kind of a double-edged sword, and we might talk about that a little bit later. Some of the best records that we can find for family history are censuses because of that detail. This is the thing. We need to get into censuses as late as possible. And of course, the more detailed they are, the more likely they are to be protected, particularly with those people who may be still alive. So we have to fight against these two conflicting desires to get what we need. The word itself comes from censere, which is the Latin for estimate. The Roman Empire used these records all the way from the 6th century BC to list all of their citizens and all of their property for, again, taxation, as we're all too used to, and military service, which we're less used to today, but of course it still happens. And the earliest census records that we can find and look at are almost 6,000 years old. They come from ancient Egypt and they come from Babylon, and they list, again, the things governments find important, perhaps for taxation, perhaps for other reasons, but they list people, livestock, butter, honey, milk, wool, and vegetables. And the earliest surviving preserved census that we could use is from China. It's carried out in about 2 AD, so it's over 2,000 years old, and it's still considered to be accurate. If we can get back that far, we could find our many times ancestor in that census, which is an amazing thing to consider and to think about. Of course, Roman censuses, we only have fragments, so we can't quite get there, but it's amazing to get this window into the world using documents like this. This is the earliest British census. I don't know if any of you know what it is, where it's from, and what it covers. Anyone? Okay, so this is the Census Fern Alben. It's from the ancient kingdom of Dalriada, which is in the Western Isles of Scotland. There are a number of places in Scotland named Dalry as a result, as an abridgment of that old name. And of course, once again, it refers to taxation and military service. Every single local chief listed their homage to the king and the things that they had to pay in terms of raiding or war. And so we see here, Clelland has 430 houses. So he has to provide 2 7 benches, which is a kind of ship, every 20 houses in a sea expedition. It shows how many fleets, how many ships had to be provided for this notable local noble. So this is the first census we can really find in Britain that we can look at. But you're probably more used to something like this, the next landmark census, and the largest to survive in great detail. It's the Domesday book. It was taken in 1086, and it valued and ascertained all of the tax across all of England and Wales. It's written in Latin, and it is on Findmypast if you want to take a browse. It's a fascinating book, and used all of these local terms when you couldn't have Latin equivalents. So you'll see a fascinating influence of Saxon and Latin, depending on what they're talking about and things. It shows you a little bit about how culture formed. And you can see the very earliest moments of English culture. It was named after the Book of Judgment because its decisions, like those of the Last Judgment, are unalterable. It contains the names of those landowners and tenants, but not the people who worked on the land. So if your ancestors were peasants, of course, as many of our ancestors were, they won't be included in here. But ideally, when we've traced back this far, we probably have an ancestor who was particularly notable. We may not know their name just yet, but hopefully you can get back this far and you may then find their name in something like this. So don't give up hope. It is genealogically relevant, and it's considered to be accurate even today. So it's perhaps the earliest original document that you're going to find your ancestors' names in. As we get further and further back, it's a little harder to prove or verify some of these things. And these documents, the Domesday entries, are something that we can find more detail on, and we can find a bit more about these lineages. So it's something that we still can reach for. So again, that's on Findmypast. It's worth having a look. And if you take a look at this here on the left, now this is interesting. So what do you think that is? It's actually another kind of census. So the Incas in South America, they didn't have a written language. They used these ropes, and they knotted and colored different strings along the rope to record information. So we have early censuses from the Inca Empire. Unfortunately, we don't know how to read them because that skill has been lost. But this is information. This may be a household. It may be an ancestor's household, but we're completely unable to do that. But it's an amazing way to see how different people saw the world, which is the point I'm trying to get at a little bit, that censuses show you how the world is perceived. These are the things that governments find important, and different governments find different things important. Understand the context of this in the same way. German censuses are quite interesting in that sense, because they had to massage their numbers to get what they wanted for different German states. But that goes both ways. So they would massage their numbers up when it came to getting a proportion of the central taxation pot. But then they'd massage their numbers down, because the more people you had in your state, the more soldiers you had to provide. So you'd get very different numbers depending on where you were looking for the population of certain areas. And so it's worth understanding that when we look at particular documents. And that brings us to a larger point indeed. And that is the British census, understanding this and seeing the world through our ancestors' eyes. So let's take a look at the modern British census, 1801 to the modern day, as we know. The first modern British census was taken in 1801, every 10 years after that. In 1941, of course, there's a little bit of an exception we'll talk about slightly later. In 1921, in Ireland and Northern Ireland, there was no census either. Their census is from 1926. It was taken for 12 different reasons, but mostly it was to count the number of men available to fight in the Napoleonic Wars, which you know were going on over on the continent at the time, as we're in the heart of that. That was around about 1797, I think, if I remember rightly. And there was a man named Robert Malthus, who you might have heard of or might not. And he had this belief, this understanding. You might have heard about Malthusian growth, that we got to a point in society that our population was growing at such an exponential rate that eventually we were going to run out of resources, run out of space, and then we were all going to die. So that slightly alarmed people. So they decided to keep a little bit of a track on what was going on and see if this was anything to be concerned about. And so that was another surrogate reason that was added in. This was something that they could understand and better think about. And even today, by seeing the growth in population, the governments can better allocate services and use these statistics to influence where they spend tax money. The first 4 censuses, because of the only reason that they were these kind of reasons, they're mainly head counts. They don't really care too much for names. They don't have much personal information. Sometimes you get the name of the head of the household only. And later census records have much more detail. But the questions differ from year to year. And that's important to remember as well. So if we can't find something in one census, we'll move to the next one perhaps, and that might be the one that gives you the answer that you need. Let's look at some early fragments. The 1841 to 1911 census is available almost in its entirety. I don't say entirety because there are some exceptions, and I'll show you where to find those. And it becomes more detailed as we go through the decades. But the census began in 1801, although in the Isle of Man it was 1811, and in Ireland 1821. There are some fragments of these early 1841 census records to survive, and those fragments can really help you. You might be lucky. They vary quite a lot depending from town to town what's in this. There are a number of great fragments on Findmypast. My favourite is, I know, the census for Orkney, Ronaldsay and Bury, but the 1821 census for Hendon in Middlesex counted again the things that people found important: the number of dogs and windows in every property. And very few of these records are online. We've got probably, I think, the largest collection online, but there are so many. So take a look at local archives. They're more likely to be in a local archive, or perhaps the National Records of Scotland or the National Archives. So get used to searching for those catalogues as well as online. Don't stop your search there, because if you can find something that's relevant to your particular parish, then you're in luck, and it might really get you another generation or two further back. So look at those particular locations, parishes, counties, look at them all. And that brings us next to the 1841 census, which is the first census really that we can use on a large scale for genealogy. It's the first census to intentionally record the names of all the individuals in a household or institution. We can see on the left a little example, but we'll see another one shortly. When you're looking in this census, remember that the ages of people over 15 were usually, and I say usually, it was the instruction, but it wasn't always listened to. So you may get lucky. So that's why perhaps you might see someone with an odd numbered age, but they're usually rounded down to the nearest multiple of 5. So if someone's 18, they'll be listed as 15 or something along those lines. It's not the nearest, they're always rounded down. So 24-year-olds, you'll find them as 20, etc. So remember that, and don't use this age as their birth age when we're looking for perhaps their baptismal birth. The location of birth was restricted only to whether someone was born in the county or not. So that limits us somewhat, especially for those people born elsewhere. But of course, many people were born quite locally at the time. And there are some extra marks you may not have seen on the census that can help you also. So we can see a single /, which means the end of a family. That doesn't mean they're in a different dwelling though. So if we see 2 slashes, that's the end of the dwelling. Then we move on to the next building. So this is the difference to look at. You might see different households next to each other, but not part of the same family. And this helps us understand. They will have known each other. Maybe they may have later had their family stories intertwined. But before that, we have to look at these little notes. And if you miss them, you might be including people who aren't actually part of your household. They're a separate household in the same building. And some of our ancestors at this point, being perhaps poor, might not have had their own building to themselves. Here's an example from somewhere hopefully you recognise. It's Buckingham Palace. And we see there the Queen. She's not 20. Her age has been rounded down, but she is born in this county. Prince Albert, 20 again, not born in this county. And also, he's got an F in where born, because he's born in foreign parts. Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha. The Princess Royal, 6 months. She's under 15. She's got an exact age, 6 months there, and she is born in this county. The Earl of Aboyne, he's not born there. I think he's born in Oxfordshire or Cambridgeshire. Someone will maybe know the answer. So he's got an N, not born in this county. We don't know where. We'll have to look. And luckily, we've got a more specific name that we might be able to look for, but we have in there, and lots of ladies in waiting, members of the court, all inside this. Everyone is included in a census. Everyone gets put into the census. It's an offence not to be included in the census. And so we find a huge amount of people filling in the data, including the royalties of the time, the lowest, the landed, they're all part of this process. Then we go to 1851 to 1901. Very, very important, because more information is included, and that's what we like. 1851 census was the very first to record full birth locations for all of those who were counted. Sometimes you might get it as an exception, but for the most part, we get those fantastic places to look for all of our parish records. Marital status is included, exact age, as much as it's given. We'll talk about that later. And relationship to the head of the household was also first recorded in 1851. But the information recorded on these censuses are provided by the head of the household. And that means there could be discrepancies based on memory, based on something you might want to perhaps obscure. So think about that and use that mindset when we're looking at these entries themselves. And enumerators copied what they heard. So if you were given a census form and you couldn't fill it in, then an enumerator would fill it in on your behalf. And that's when some strange things can happen. So be aware of that. Spelling errors can come in. There can be differences in pronunciation, which can mean things can be written differently. So think about that as we go, particularly if your ancestors perhaps you think might not have been able to read or write. But I know a lot of people think that 1911 is the first census where your ancestors filled in the entry and it's filled in by the head of the household. That's not actually true. All of these earlier censuses were also done in the same way, and they were collected in and copied into these books. And these books are what we have to look at. So all of these forms now come into this single sheet, and we see the households in perhaps a particular street going down. We see there those double slashes. We can see these different buildings, different dwellings, and then we see families. We see their relations to the head of the household. We see servants. This is an aristocratic part of town. We see the head of the household, the son, daughter, head, wife, the family. We see their marital conditions, widowers, single, married. You may find divorced very rare, but it is in there. Age at last, birthday, occupation or profession, because they are different. Employer, so if they employ people, if they work for themselves, or if they work for someone else, if they work at home, which is possible. So we see a dressmaker there in the center. She works on her own account. She has her own business and she works at home. And where born. That's fantastic. And then right at the end as well, we have another column for any infirmities, which might give you some more genealogical information. Here they're blank. We see if someone is deaf and dumb, blind, a lunatic, or feeble-minded. Of course, very different meanings today. But that, again, might help you with your family history pursuit to see where you may find other records. And this one is a little different as well, you might see, because whoever did this shows that people are people as they've always been. And this person has doodled a courting couple, a few acrobats. They've really enjoyed themselves, I think, after doing however many thousands of our ancestors listed down. They put a little bit of their own personality into this, which I love. It's a way of showing that the census is full of humans, and not only the humans inside, but the humans that fill it in. Every single pen stroke is someone's work that lives forever. Then we get to the really exciting one, 1911. This was taken on Sunday, the 2nd of April, 1911, and was the first census where original household schedules were preserved. And it lets you view all the documents written in by your ancestors, their own handwriting, their own signature. What could be more exciting? It's got not only all households, but it has institutions, prisons, workhouses, naval vessels. An attempt was even made to count the homeless. And you'll have to push me at some point. I'll post on the Findmypast forum a 1911 census found with the homeless sleeping in Regent's Park and where they're all born. So perhaps if your ancestor has moved across the country and is a vagrant, you might find them sleeping rough on the 1911 census. Sometimes they called it the fertility census because of all these new questions asked about the number of children that people had born and the number of children that were still living. Great for family history. We get those numbers and we can check against our tree and see how many we have. And there's a lot of people, just a notable number of women They think it's a few thousand, but it's very hard because, of course, they boycotted the census. They're not in the census. They thought, because this is the era of the suffragette, that if they couldn't have a vote, they shouldn't be enumerated. And so they would hide. They would stay away from the census. So if you can't find your female ancestor, perhaps they are being rather brave. But it's much easier to hide than it is to protest in itself. So you might very rarely find them protesting on a census form itself. For the most part, though, you'll find them avoiding, because that's a lot easier if you'll get a knock on the door to give an excuse for, which is a little different when you do something like this. So here we have two people. We have a daughter and a servant, and one is an artist and suffragette. We see the occupation already. Her infirmity or disability is listed that she's disenfranchised, which has been angrily crossed out by a enumerator, and we see in very large letters, votes for women. This was a very brave thing to do, because this could have got you in a lot of trouble. An enumerator has seen this. We know someone's seen this. These extra marks and numbers that we see on here is an enumerator copying down the statistics of this census so they can use this for government purposes. So if perhaps you can't read someone's occupation, something like that, take a look at these government numbers and codes, and you might get an idea of the kind of industry that someone's looking at. So that's a little trick that I do sometimes, but this was a very brave thing to do. And this could have got them in prison. It could have given them a fine. There's a lot of things that could have happened with this. So it's a mark of unbelievable bravery in a frozen snapshot in time. And we have their signature, so we know their name, and we can see their own handwriting as they do it, which is a very moving thing to see in terms of family history. Here's another one. We have the William Robert Arnold, the head of the family. We think he's 59, I think. He's been married for 25 years. He's a farmer. He works on his own farm. We see where he's born. And his disability, he's written he's short of cash. So I think we all felt that from time to time, but that's been angrily crossed out by the enumerator again. But we see the world as seen by the Arnold family and by William in particular. So we get a bit of an idea of his personality. We have the Russell family here, one of my favorites again. Thomas Russell, Daisy Russell, the wife, Reginald Russell, Percy Russell, Stanley Russell, and then the daughter, Daisy Russell again. She's 6 years old. And then just below, if you can see in pencil, the name is Teddy Bear. So he's a boarder. He's 6 months old. He's single, ladies, if you're interested. And his occupation is pleasing Daisy. He's born in Germany, as a lot of teddy bears are, as we all know. And I don't know if Daisy insisted and told her dad that teddy bear had to be included on the census, or the dad decided to include Daisy in this process and add teddy bear to get her involved. We'll never know, but what a heartwarming tale of a family we can find. And we can see this picture. It's almost like a photograph that we can see using a document like this, which is why it's so special and why I find them so exciting. The Belton family, John Charles Belton, Catherine Althea Belton, Althea Constance Belton, the daughter, Ada Williamson, the servant, and then down at the bottom, another servant. His name, Peter Tabby. He's 6 months old. His occupation is mouser, and you know where this is going, don't you? His nationality is Persian, and he is written over by an angry red pencil, and what could be the first emoji or something like that, a sad face, and someone has written, "This is a cat." Peter's long gone. We don't know any more about Peter, but from now on, he's in the census and he lives forever. He's with the family, and we know that people cared enough about him in this family to include him in the census because he's a member of the household. When this new census comes along, and I know people who in the last census included their pets as members of the family, and we'll see in the new census coming, the 1921 census, who knows how many dogs, cats, horses, birds that are included because people love them so much they thought they were part of the family and included them. They're not part of the instruction, but what a story it gives you. And that's what we can see. We can see life. That's what makes things magical. Sarah Widdowson has a son, James. And just in case you haven't got a photograph of James, there is a little one here. And there it is. And I wouldn't want to meet him on a dark night. But that's another bit of personality we can see. It's fantastic, isn't it? This is what the census is about. And it's in someone's handwriting. The government official isn't involved. And we can see people's personality in such a way. It's magical. And that's why censuses are exciting. And then to show you that this is life in itself, we have someone who is 10 minutes old. A census is designed to be written in, filled in. It's supposed to be the stroke of midnight on that particular day. So this is how the household is at that time. Here we have someone whose name isn't even decided. They're 10 minutes old. They've just been born at this point, and we see them included in the census. What a fantastic time to just see frozen forever that we can use for our family history research. It's exciting and inspiring, isn't it? And there are supplementary pages for the 1911 census. They have a lot of detail. They include details of the enumerator, a description of the enumeration district itself, the addresses, and the heads of the household too. There are no summary books for naval vessels and for overseas military institutions and establishments, but there are lots of other things. So let's take a look at this. Perhaps I didn't know what this is. I'm looking at a 1911 census, and this looks a little different, doesn't it? A little stranger, perhaps. So if we look at our wonderful record viewer at the bottom, which I know some of you have been very excited about this week, and we'll surely talk about that on Friday at Findmypast Live, but you will see next to the record pages in that film strip of information we can look for, you see a little thing that says related materials. And when we click on related materials, we see all the things that might get us excited. And in this instance, we have the cover of the census, the address of the census involved, and the cover of the collector pages. And if I take a look, I can see that I'm actually looking at the Penzance Union Workhouse in 1911. This gives me that detail. I see where it is in the parish. I see the urban district, the ecclesiastical parish. I see the parliamentary borough. These things might lead me to, say, electoral rolls. There are lots of things I can do with this information. But also, if I keep looking, I can see things like a description of that district. I can see the walk that the enumerator took as he went around this district. It might give me some description. It might tell me more. So I see there are 12 houses in one particular lane, and I see that it includes Miss Bull's cottages, the houses both north and south towards Meadowgale Lane, and I can get a feel for that little area that is included in this enumeration district, and this enumerator covered during that walk on that fateful day, collecting these forms or helping people fill things in. It gives us that extra bit of context and detail. Here, I see lists of the heads of household and then the numbers of people in there. So if I can't read the name of a head of household or a family name, and I perhaps don't know the number of the house or anything like that, I can look at this and I get a second chance to interpret, which is exciting because it's also in someone else's handwriting. So if that person isn't that good at writing, I can enter someone else's handwriting and I can take a look, and hopefully that's a little easier to understand. So we've got 2 rolls of that dice. So that's fantastic to see. Then after 1911, there are still more things we can use. The 1921 census was taken on the 19th of June, 1921. We're all very excited about that. But because of the 1920 Census Act, it won't be available to the public until 2022, next year. I'm sure you've already made a list of everyone you want to look up inside it. The 1931 census only covers England and Scotland and Wales, and now Ireland is a separate country itself, but it was destroyed due to a fire on 19th of December 1942. Ironically, not as a result of enemy action. It was an accidental fire, and the remains were swept away before anyone had a chance to assess them. Scotland's 1931 census does survive, however. I won't say it's because it's colder up here, but it was stored in a different place at least, and it will be available in 2031 or 2032 perhaps. So there's something a little extra to look forward to if you're from Scotland or have Scottish relatives. The 1941 census wasn't taken. We mentioned that just before, and that was due to World War II. There is another thing we can use, but let's talk about that later. And the 1951 census will be available again in 2051 or 2052. That's a large gap, isn't it, between 1921 and 1951. I'm starting on a good diet, and I'm hopeful, but 1921 census really is the biggest thing that might well happen in our lifetime. So it's something that we should get really excited for, and something that is going to help us immeasurably in telling us what our family was doing at any particular time in family history. The 1939 register, though, is a good thing to fill that gap. It gets better every time as well because of the fact that we open records for those people who are no longer with us. We can prove that. So there are a number of millions of extra records that have been released to this collection since we launched this back in, I believe, about 2014. I think it was quite some time ago. It's called the Wartime Domesday Book. And it's not really an exaggeration when you think about it. It's just like that early Domesday book that we looked at, because it's a register of the entire civilian population of England and Wales. It was used for a lot of things, for identity cards, ration books. And the most fascinating thing about the 1939 register is that it's a living document. It was used when the National Health Service was founded. And I'll give you an example shortly, but it was updated until 1991 with details of death and marriage. Here is a family you might recognize. We see the address again. We've been here before in this presentation. Buckingham Palace, SW1. Anyone visited? Anyone likes it? Maybe anyone's been to stay or been for tea. Perhaps fewer of you. We have His Majesty the King and Her Majesty the Queen. Queen Elizabeth, the current Queen Elizabeth, is not here, and she would be closed because she's still alive, but she was in Balmoral at the time, so records tell us. We have other members of the royal household. We have married, we have male or female. We have their birth date. If you see anything in green or amended, that means that it's been later improved, and that's because it was this living document. It can be improved. So someone may have lost their job. They might have even lost their head if they got the Queen Mother's date of birth wrong, and she's born on the 4th of August, not the 24th. We have single, married, widowed, or divorced. And we have the occupations of everyone in the household. So here we see private secretaries, equerries, ladies in waitings, domestic servants, all the things that tell us what everyone was doing. It seems that the King and Queen are unemployed, but let's not let that hold them back. And then there's another column here on the second page, anything that was considered militarily relevant. So we have people who are army captains, lieutenant colonels, people in the blood transfusion scheme, the air raid wardens of the time. Buckingham Palace has a number of them because it's so large. In some cases, I've seen people who served in the First World War with their service number because they may want to be called up again, perhaps if things got particularly desperate. In one case, I saw someone who said they owned a lorry. I don't know if when the invasion comes that they were going to arrive and take that lorry, but it's one thing that was considered relevant enough to be included. One thing to note with the 1939 census, 1939 register, I know some people call it 1939 census, and you can be forgiven for seeing why. It is almost a census, is that you won't see places of birth and things like that. And there was a little speculation as to why. And I did a tour and traveled around the country, and a suggestion was made by someone who knew a lot about these kind of things, who worked in the civil service and had a bit of a historical slant and understanding of this, is that there were many censuses and records taken like this across Europe. And at this point, things looked rather bleak for Britain. And so places of birth were not included for a very important reason, that if an invasion came, and if these many refugees who had left Germany and Czechoslovakia and other places, Poland, had been discovered in Britain, and there was an easy way to find a document to find out exactly where all these people were, they could very easily be rounded up and very terrible things may happen. And so it was a prudent move that was important. Not only we see again what a government finds important at the time, and place of birth wasn't as interesting as the other details that were needed, but also someone thought this may well save a number of lives, and so specifically excluded again for this reason. And it was particularly prescient because a similar record collection like this was taken in the Netherlands, and that was used for that purpose. And many people probably lost their lives as a result. So that forward-thinking person, if the darkest times would have happened, may well have saved a number of lives. That's something to, although we can be slightly frustrated we don't have places of birth in the 1939 register, we can have a little bit of an appreciation as to why and an understanding why that may have happened. As I said, this is a living document. The National Health Service was formed in 1948. We all applaud it. It's something unique in the world, and they needed a database of everyone who existed at the time in Britain so they could help to administer this wonderful new service. And so rather than make a new one, they had this sitting there. So your registration number became your National Health Service number. And if you do have a ration book and an identity card, you'll notice this. It's your NHS number too. And the records were updated on paper all the way until 1991. That second page of the 1939 register is full of medical details. And they moved to digital after that. I think everyone breathed a very large sigh of relief. Everyone who died up to 1991 was recorded as having died. So those records are open. And fascinatingly so as well, any females who later married will have their new names added to the register as well, And on Findmypast, you can search by either of those names. So here we have an Audrey Morgan, and she later married someone and became Audrey Kilkeary. And if you look at this, you can search for any of these. You can search for Audrey Kilkeary. Maybe you don't know their maiden name, or perhaps you know them and you're working forwards and you need to know who they married so you can find their marriage, their children, perhaps where they died. So now I can work forwards as well. So it's a fantastic extra thing to add. Let's look at Scotland a little bit more. So Scotland was carrying out a census at the same time, and it was run from London almost identically to England and Wales from 1801 to 1851. The first Scottish Registrar General was appointed in 1854. And from 1861, the census was a purely Scottish document. It was inspired by the English counterparts. It was very similar, as you know, but different fields can appear. So in Scotland, they're a little more interested in who could speak Gaelic, who could speak English, and who could speak both. So that's included in Scottish censuses, where it isn't, of course, in the centre of London. The original 1911 household schedules we can see in England and Wales were destroyed in Scotland. So if you've seen a 1911 Scottish census, hopefully you have, if you have Scottish relatives, you'll see those enumeration books, just like we see in England and Wales from 1901 to 1851. You'll see another thing just like that. And so the same for 1921 as well. While enumerators' original returns, we have the schedules filled in with all the families and households in a list, slightly different from England and Wales. Then we move across to Ireland, perhaps very useful considering it's St. Patrick's Day this week. The first attempt to take a census in Ireland was in 1813, but they abandoned it after 2 years. It didn't go so well. The first full Irish census was taken in 1821, a little bit later than Britain. Censuses then were taken every single decade until 1911. There was no 1921 census due to the War of Independence, and the next census, 1926, will be available to the public in 2027, we believe, although perhaps maybe it may come earlier depending on different things, but definitely, hopefully by 2027. I've got some things to look at myself in there, so I'm definitely eager to see what's there. The 1821 to 1851 census in Ireland were largely destroyed in 1922. Now, Four Courts Fire we know oh so well, the Public Record Office in Dublin. The 1861 and 1871 censuses were destroyed shortly after the censuses were taken. And the 1881 and 1891 census were pulped for paper during the First World War. What a crime. Oh, I can't even imagine the information that's lost and the things that could be found in that kind of thing. The 1901 and 1911 censuses are the first we can use really for family history in entirety. They survive and they're available to search on Findmypast and with links to those original images to see the records. Of course, we know no 1921 census, the War of Independence, and that next census, 1926, 2027, hopefully. But not all Irish records from the censuses from 1821 to 1851 were destroyed. We have almost 500,000 on Findmypast. It's worth a look. We also have almost 150,000 census search forms from the 1841 and 1851 census. We'll talk about that shortly, used to grant pensions in 1909. Irish census records can give a lot of information we don't get on other British censuses. They'll give you things like anyone included in the previous census that isn't there. They'll explain what happened to them. Have they moved away? Perhaps they're now in Philadelphia or Boston or somewhere else, and perhaps they've died. It'll give you the year they've died, and it might give you some more information there. And because of the lack of census records we can find, you'll have to look a lot more so in Ireland at census substitutes. These pension search forms are an interesting semi-substitute. A lot of the 1841-1851 census was lost in 1922. We know that. But when the pension was introduced in 1909, because we don't have birth records at that point, they came in 1864, officials had to find somewhere to prove that these people were old enough to get a pension. So what they would do is they would ask people, what were you doing in an early census? And they would say, well, I was here with this member of the family, this street. And they'd go back and they'd look and they'd write down everything they found in this particular household. And so the original records don't survive, but these abstracts that were created as they searched for pensions for those people who were still there are still in existence. And we can use those to find the information that we need. And there are other census substitutes as well in Ireland. So Griffith's valuation, landed estate court rentals, petty sessions records, pension applications, dog licenses, so many things we could talk about. There's a great presentation coming tomorrow with Brian Donovan and Fiona who will be more than happy to explain all of these things to you in great detail and go into your Irish brick walls. I'll definitely be tuning in, and I recommend talking to them about all of these census substitutes. You have to think a bit more laterally in Ireland, and they are the experts. I always call Brian the Bono of Irish genealogy. He's the rock star. If anyone doesn't know something, and if he doesn't know it, it's not worth knowing. So definitely tune in for that and find out more. But the censuses themselves are the backbone, and if we can start with those, we're in the right place. And now let's go through a few tips. First of all, I would avoid exact years of birth. When we're looking at censuses, there are a number of reasons people could have massaged their age up or down, and we have to take that context into account. Make use of other people in the household. We can search with other people in the household. There are probably lots of John Smiths in the census, but there might not be as many John Smiths living with a Jemima Crawford, and that will narrow things down. And with a little bit of extra information, of course, we can use advanced search pages. We don't even have to search with the name. We can search with occupations, with counties, with different fields, and find a more manageable number of records that we can look through. And then, of course, understand the context of censuses, which we'll talk about again shortly. So context is always king. Here are one of the fantastic little comedic articles that they find, a census year in all of these fantastic newspapers that we have online. And the wife of this man, upon my word, Mr. Pewitt, is this the way you fill up your census? So you can call yourself the head of the family, do you? And me, just a female. You see, context explains why that happened and how the man of the household may not really be the head of the household. It will depend entirely on your family, but we understand perhaps the legal requirements in certain documents to understand how they work. A full index of every record set is available on our site through the All Record Sets collection. It can be searched by location, by record type, by theme. You can't break it, touch wood. So do explore and investigate as much as you can in this collection. It's updated in real time, so it can give you the most up-to-date reflection of all the records we have online. Here we have it. We can type in anything we want. Look in locations. I look in Scotland. I can see perhaps all the records for Dundee, different things. Records are specific. But I can type in census and see our census collection in great detail. Not just the censuses we know and love, 1841 to 1911, but censuses that cover fragments of earlier eras, census substitutes that might be worth looking at, other things that we might really want to take a look at if we want to push our family history further. We could talk about census substitutes till the cows come home. And one day, I think maybe we will have to do a session on those, because I can think of a lot that we could go over. But use this and see what you can find. I can see as well, when I get there, I can search with as much or as little as I like with those search fields. You don't even need a name, as we said. Full date of birth in things like the 1939 register. I love using date of birth. Start with less, add more, always. Make use of the second person fields, as we've said, and common surnames rejoice, because this is the way you can get to your ancestor, your relative, by entering bits information. Perhaps a part is mistranscribed. Don't worry, take a part out, put a different part in, experiment, mix and match until you get to the records that you need. Here's an example here of something that will really help you. If we look here, this census substitute, a little early census from 1790 from Edinburgh, just below the search fields, we see something that says learn more about these records. This tells you everything that you need to know about that record collection. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I don't know everything about every record collection on Findmypast. And people will ask questions and assume that I do, and not at all. But if there is a record collection I don't know about, the first thing I do, I go to that all record sets, I type it in, and I go and take a look and I read exactly what's here. And it will explain to me what I'm looking at, things I might need to know, things I should understand, perhaps things that are missing. If we're looking at, say, the 1841 census, anything like that, I might see that there are particular counties that are a little thinner on the ground. I think it's Flintshire and Denbighshire are a little bit more delicate for 1841, and I know that all too well because that's where I've got some ancestors I can't find as a result. But we can find out if we're perhaps going a little mad, or if the records don't exist by reading this. And we can also find out different things we might have to apply, different rules, like in 1841, rounding those ages, etc. Things we might understand. We also see, as well as this information that we see here, and perhaps listed out the things that you might see in the transcript itself, Tips for searching, things we might need to know. So in this, we need to know about anglicisation, because we're in Scotland at this point where there might be some Gaelic names that have been changed a little to fit the English way. Then on the right-hand side, we have relevant relevant record collections, and perhaps even lists of parish coverage or lists of coverage that might help us understand the census some more. So these are really helpful as well, and they can hopefully lead us to new things. We can also search by address on these censuses. We're the only site, as far as I know, that we can search by address, and you can use that search just to go through different properties. And I always, if I can't find someone on a census, they disappear. Maybe I'm looking in 1891 and I can't find them in 1901, and that's strange. So I go back, I find where they are in 1891, and I search for that address. And when I do that, I take a look at who's in that house. If it's a completely different family, they've moved away. I need to think about that. If it's perhaps another member of the family, then that's interesting, and that might lead me somewhere. If maybe I might find the same family, perhaps mistranscribed or misread. There are many different reasons why, but that is my way that I can get to them, so I can look through. And also seeing the property itself and how it's changed might give me some context. Perhaps even that address no longer exists, or maybe it's been renamed. There are other things that I can find out by searching by address, and it's particularly useful for that reason. In 1911, though, and before, remember that postal addresses are fairly new, and so it's something you have to sort of take with a bit of detective work. Postcodes don't come until far later, so we're looking at streets, names and numbers. Numbers may change as more properties arrive on a street. There are many different things to be aware of as we're going through. Use wildcards a lot when we're looking at this, because of the differences that may arise when we're looking at different street names and addresses copied from every single 1911 census, for example. Question marks for one letter that may be different, an asterisk for something we don't know how many letters may be in there, or even if a letter is in there at all. In this kind of search, it is invaluable. Here we see the 1911 census for England and Wales. You are probably very familiar with this page. I got it from the all record sets, and we see all of those different individual fields that we can use. Don't use them all. Just use the ones that you really need and keep narrowing down until you get to a manageable number of records. But you'll see this here: search for person, search for address. So when I click search for address, the fields change. And this is when I can start doing my clever detective work. So I'm going to enter a place where I lived when I lived in London. A street called Cenrab Street. It's quite a strange one. It's actually Barnes backwards. Victorian name, and don't know how they came up with that one. But I see there are two results. And when I go through, I see both of them are in the right place. So perhaps it's two sets of street numbers from the same street. I don't know. I have to look at them. If I can't find them in one, I'll look in the other. But when I go through, I see all of the street numbers. I can take a look and I can see who's in each house. And so I see here number 10, Cenrab Street. I see a police pensioner, and I see his family, his wife, his 3 daughters and his son. I can get an idea for a neighborhood. It's really exciting. If I have an older property, I can see who lived in my house back in the day, which is really exciting. See who stood where you stood, who walked where you walk. That's magical. It's not family history, but it's history, and that is what we're all here for, what we're all really excited about. Street names do change over the years. There are some fantastic examples in London and elsewhere. If you can't find the street now, then search for that street and see what it may have been called in the past, and look at old maps as well to see what the street is named on an old map. You may find it very simply and easily on there. And again, use those wildcards all the time in that search. I can't echo that enough. So there we have it. We have a big introduction to the census as we've gone through as many things as we can. Let's see how long we've gone through, because I haven't seen a clock as we're going. So wow, that took a little longer than I expected. But now let's go through your questions and see what we can do. And hopefully we'll get to some. And if not, I will come back, because I didn't expect that to take so long. And I'll make sure that if there are some more questions I can answer later on, I will do so. So let's skim through and see what we can see. I'm going to try and go as far back as we can. So Linda has loved using the address search. It's helped solve a few problems. That's exciting, Linda. It really is useful. I can't recommend it enough, particularly when you have no clue where to look next. Take the things you know, look in the address and see who's there before and afterwards. households at this sort of point. Houses are quite hard to come by, and they don't really move hands as much as they will do in the modern day. So perhaps it will be passed to another member of the family. Perhaps another relative may be there. Take a look and see what's there. And so let's take a look at what else we have here. Anya is saying Smith is a tricky one. They're lucky their Smiths were in Scotland, but the mother's maiden name was given on birth, marriage and death certificates. That's true. That is a benefit we have about being in Scotland. It's very, very useful. And a big comment as well that we have made, that we're actually planning on making some changes, improvements, if you will, to our address search to make it easier for you. So watch this space. Very, very soon it will help you indeed, and it will make address searches even more useful. And so Lois has said they can't do address searches very well because they get results so big they can't use them. They need to look into getting better at it, particularly electoral records. Start with the census, start with the simple things, and then get more complicated as you go. I think if you bite off more than you can chew, it's also daunting, isn't it? It's very difficult when you're staring at 3,000 records or something like that. And so try and get it down to a manageable number. Don't put house numbers in, put a street in, but then perhaps if you're looking at a more common street name, perhaps use a county as well, or perhaps use a district, something like that. Maybe use the information you know from an earlier census to know which district you're looking at, which might help you to make sure you've got this really tight set of criteria. And that means you've got a easier to get into chunk, because it can be so big when you're looking at something like, Barnes Lane or something like that, where there are probably 1 million of those. Newton Road, I can name 50,000 green lanes, for example. And so we need some way to get in. And the thing that we can do, and the big advantage of using websites like Findmypast, is that we have databases. And that's the difference between early genealogy and modern genealogy. We can start typing things in, and we can find things in a way that our ancestors could have only dreamed of when we're looking at records, by interrogating little bits and finding things that sound similar. We don't have to go page by page through. Although also looking at the census now, we have that film strip we've talked about. Go page by page through, look at the page before, look at the page after, see who else is on that street, and it might give you a feel for the social class of the area, the kind of people who knew your ancestors, knew your relatives. Maybe even you might find an early spouse. Let's have a think about that. There could be a relative nearby who becomes a relative. So there are lots of things to think about using this that we can do in a way that we can't do in previous centuries, previous years, previous decades. And so interrogate that with these extra tools and you will get much, much further. So it's really exciting. And so we have some more. I'm just going through now and taking a look. Anya said Brian's presentation at RootsTech was brilliant. That's a reference to our Irish records. And so definitely tune in for that one tomorrow. It's going to be very, very exciting indeed. And Fiona's very good as well. I'm going to not try Anya's pronunciation in Gaelic. I think it's Darbegan Gaeligad Ham, but I'm not totally sure, so please don't punish me if not. I have tried learning a little bit of Gaelic, and I have given up because it's almost impossible. And everyone who speaks Gaelic, I have a massive amount of admiration for. It's a beautiful language, full of the natural poetry that makes Scotland great. And unfortunately, it has bested me. So if we can move on to Hungarian or Italian or German or French, then that's fine. But no, Gaelic is not something I can do. But again, it's always important to understand if your ancestors could speak something like that. Perhaps it gives you an idea. If you understand the roots of those words and names, you might get an idea of different anglicization, and you might find other name variants you can use when you're searching as well. And John has said the Scottish 19201 census should be available about June 2021, 6 months for England and Wales census is available. Well, fingers crossed, John. We'll have a look. I'm waiting for that and hoping there'll be as many relatives as I imagine you have as well that I'm looking for. So that day, I will definitely, you might not be able to get in touch with me because I'll be knee deep in family history and I'll be really excited to see that. So perhaps we'll reconvene and we'll talk about the great discoveries we found as well. So let's keep all of our fingers and toes crossed. But definitely 2021, 2022, for all of the records, we're very lucky anyway to be in this time for family history and so many new records appearing all the time. but this is a particularly good time to be a genealogist, isn't it? It's excellent. And so we can see, so Aoife has made a very great comment there talking about those missing parishes. And again, we can see using that search on the right, that little set of articles, the missing articles, missing parishes for different locations. 1851, Paddington is one of the missing parishes, 1851. If you get into that list, if you can't find someone, go to that all record sets, go to that right-hand side list and take a look at the missing areas. And then you can take a look and see if that's why you can't find someone. They might be mistranscribed, but it may not even be there. So it's important to arm yourself with that context. Shaz has said they definitely would have filled out the 1911 census with votes for women across it, no doubt whatsoever. And that's the admirable thing that can happen. But you have an opportunity in the 2021 census or 2022 census, if you're in Scotland, to also describe the world how you see it. So please do perhaps leave some kind of note or mark for our descendants and our relatives who might also be, as genealogists, tracing backwards and seeing the life how we saw it. So if you've got a chance to do it, definitely leave those notes. And so let's see what else we've got as we run through. And Steve's gone. Beth has discovered some extra family members thanks to 1911, and they're able to confirm known children up to the 1911 census. So that's exciting, isn't it? That's great. And so Gillian has said sometimes they find the wife marked down on the census as unpaid domestic, which can be used as another term for housewife. That's right. Unpaid domestic duties is a terrible job, isn't it? It sounds very, very demeaning, but it does mean basically someone who works around the home. And of course, unpaid, rather unfortunately, because I think they deserve it. But that's what that means. So it doesn't mean they have a particular job. It does mean that they are around the house. And so let's see what else we have as we go through. Are there any differences in the 1921 census from the 1911? Yes, there are, Paul. There are different questions asked on each census. The 1921 census, again, as they get more detailed, has some more detail still. And so we're looking forward to seeing, you'll also see employer in there and some details about where someone works. So that could be really exciting. And I know we have one name studies, one place studies. Imagine one job studies. Wouldn't that be exciting? We can talk about all the people who worked for Boots or Clarks or Cadbury's, and we can maybe understand perhaps all the people who worked at a certain mill. That's something fascinating that would be really exciting to see. So that's really good. So that's another reason to look forward to it. And we can see some more here. Lois has said they love the way they have a crossing out for Prince Albert. Even the palace enumerator made a mistake. That was back in our 1841 census. That's it, exactly. These are humans writing this. They make mistakes. They have errors. They have things that they want to talk about, things they're desperate to tell people. This is the important thing, and this is the way that we can see that life. This is why censuses are so important. Censuses are so exciting for a reason. And that's why I love censuses. And I think hopefully you love censuses too. I know that we're at the top of the hour and we've talked a lot about all the different things we can see in a census. And there are more questions which I will sift through and see if there are any more that I can get to. And I want to thank you, though, for joining. And we've had hopefully an exciting hour. I've had a great amount of fun. And it's been great seeing you all here together as well. You have me again on Friday. You're perhaps unlucky this week. And so we're going to have more to talk about. We have some great new records. Hopefully you'll have some discoveries. If you've got Irish relatives, definitely tune in tomorrow for another exciting episode of Find My Past from home, from a different home. And then you'll hopefully learn more about Ireland just in time for St. Patrick's Day. Perhaps you'll get your connection just in time to order your shamrock hat, and you can then have that look of the Irish when it's time for maybe the lottery on Saturday. But thank you very much for coming, and I want to again just share that infectious love of censuses. And if you haven't explored all the censuses you can, go back to them. They are the backbone of your family history. They give you so much information. They're a snapshot of time. They tell us more than we can hope about our families, and that's why they're so important. So I want to just really hammer on to get to a census. If you can find one new person, come and tell me about it on Friday, and we will all applaud you. That's my bit of homework. If you can, tell me on Friday what you found, and we'll all share in it, and we'll all enjoy, because if you find something new, that's always worth a bit of a round of applause. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I've inspired you, and I hope that we can gather again soon. Stay safe and enjoy your family history in the meantime. Talk to you soon, and hopefully we won't have lost our census in the meantime. Take care. Bye-bye.